Hey, what's up? It's Kit time for another video. Today, oh man, this topic, I'm telling you, it's a bigger bone than I expected it to be. So I kind of bit my tongue on this one. But hopefully, I simplified it in such a way that it's easy to absorb and digest. Okay, so before we start, let me actually tell you exactly how this all started. So I went out fishing, doing some videos on how to retrieve lures and stuff, and then I asked myself like, hey, I mean, I should talk about how lures move because it actually helps you understand. I mean, like literally, you look at a lure and then you go like, oh, I know how this moves, right? Like the basic movement. So understanding something like that helps you in your buying habits for lures. You could immediately spot if this lure is something that you could use or not, right? So instead of being lured to buy a lure, you actually buy a lure because you know that you could lure fish with it, right? And some lures are made better than others. That's just the whole point. Now, throughout your lifetime, your biggest expenditure wouldn't be on gear, but it'll be on lures because most of the lures that you'll buy, you won't get to use. And that's just a fact, you know? We will have more lures than we could ever use. So hopefully with this video, I'd be able to help you buy the lures that you would be able to actually use. That's the whole purpose of this video. So, what is lure movement? Great question. A lure's action is basically the motion, actually, the motion pattern. Okay, the motion pattern it produces in water. It would be the wobble, dive, roll, dart, flutter, vibration, spin, whatever. And the physics lets us break down what controls it. And this is what's pretty cool with our world today because we could literally break everything down using physics. The main factors fall into the design, the material, the environment, operating conditions, and the input that the human puts in it. There are several factors that rule the lure when it comes to its movement. And each of these actually have elements. Okay, so we're going to break everything down. And those factors are the geometry or the shape, mass and distribution, buoyancy and density, surface and appendages, hardware, hydrodynamic forces, retrieve and angular input, and environmental factors. Now, we're going to break all of these down. There are elements within these, each and every single one of these factors. And hopefully, I'm able to actually explain this in a very easy to digest manner. Like, fingers crossed. Now, one of the biggest contributors of how a lure moves its shape and geometry, and that is literally on top of the list. So you have the body profile that gives its unique action. The lip bill angle and size dictates diving depth, angle of attack, oscillation frequency. The body profile gives it the wobble, uh, how it tracks straight. Streamlined lures will track more straighter. Wider bodied lures will give up more vibration, but will have like a more pronounced wider motion. Asymmetry in lures creates hydrodynamic lift and side forces because of its unevenness. So, like take for example, sliding motion on a jig, and it also gives it a lot more erratic action because of its asymmetrical shape. So, like take for example, um, a an asymmetrical jig would have a lot more movement than a symmetrical jig. It's something that we've actually discussed a lot when we were talking about jigs. The second factor to look at when it comes to lure movement is mass and mass distribution. This is literally the weight and where the weight is placed within the lure. So we look at total mass first, okay, or the overall weight of the lure. It's important to take note of this because heavier lures tend to resist quick acceleration. So, which means that they will respond more sluggishly to your manipulation. Um, Generally, heavier lures will have a slower, steadier action. You see this a lot when you're actually going jigging. So, bigger lures, heavier jigs, sorry, will actually have slower, steadier actions. Now you compare that with a smaller, lighter jig, and you'll find that the smaller, lighter jig would be all over the place. One twitch of your rod and they respond immediately, whereas with the heavier, bigger lures, they're kind of sluggish in that regard, even if you're using the right sort of rods for them. And yeah, so in effect, heavier lures that have resistance to quick acceleration, you'll find that smaller, lighter lures, or lighter lures, not smaller, but because smaller could be heavier, right? So lighter lures would be very quick to respond to your manipulation, and they will be more erratic in their actions instead of being slow to respond with slower, steadier actions. Lighter lures would tend to be more erratic and quick to respond. Now, another thing to look at, and the next element to the mass and mass distribution is the center of mass. So we're talking about forward versus rear weighted lures. Very good example of a forward weighted lure is the lead head jig. So when you're using a lead head jig with a soft plastic tail, you'll find that it has a swimming motion that's kind of like pointing down because of the weight, and it has they tend to generally have a tighter wobble. Another good example of this would be like trolling lures. And there are some trolling lures that actually have a ring at the bottom of the lip, so you could put in additional weight, you know. And it aids with the stability of the lure as well. So forward weighted lures are very stable lures, and they can go quite fast. Now rear weighted lures, on the other hand, sink tail first because well, the weight is concentrated there, right? So like poppers, stick baits, you'll find that they have a lot of weight at the end, and when they float, they actually float with a head up attitude before you actually start working them. Generally, with a tail weighted design, you'll be able to actually cast quite far with them. um, the biggest problem with tail weighted lures is that they're not the best swimmers, you know. So they're not the easiest to use as well, but they cast quite well. So there's kind of like a uh, a disadvantage there. Now, they've actually mitigated this by doing a weight shifting system, and that's where you find lures like the Max Wrap from Rapala, where the lure uh, has like a ball bearing that transfers from when you cast it, the ball bearing actually goes back to the rear position, and it aids in casting. As soon as the lure lands in the first twitch, the ball bearing goes back to the front chamber, helping it to swim quite well. So that's actually pretty cool. There's milk and potatoes, there's salt and pepper, and for mass and mass distribution, there's buoyancy and density. And it's something that's very familiar with people. Obviously, you'll find that there are lures that are floating, sinking, and suspending. And these attributes are the ones that actually set the baseline of motion for each and every single lure that exists out there. So floating lures, like Zara Spooks, would have their walk the dog action, but first they have to float, right? Um, and then there's the sinking lures like jigs and stuff like that. Before they move, you know, before you could work them, of course, you have to let them, you know, sink down to the bottom. Suspending lures are kind of unique because um, they first start out as floaters, and then when you reel them in, they go down, and then they kind of stay within a neutral zone where they kind of just linger and slowly float up. And that's very, very handy for some fish species that actually kind of respond to that sort of thing, and it's relatively new. I believe the very first suspending lures started around the 90s or something like that. I could be wrong, but before that, it was literally just sinking and floating. Um, the uh, the center of mass, right? So whether it be nose weighted, tail weighted, or all that, what counteracts that for buoyancy is the buoyancy distribution. So the air chambers or the natural buoyancy of the wood counteracts where the weights are placed, and because of that, the 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 fighting of the forces of being buoyant and being weighted actually give the lure the action, right? So that's a balancing act that a lot of lure makers do, and they're very successful at, and it creates this puppet that mimics life, and it's one of those things that actually amaze me. So buoyancy and then ballasting, right? Okay, putting weights in key areas, that's literally how you do it with stick baits. No, this is where it started to kind of give me a curveball. So while I was putting this together, um, I didn't actually think that this was such a contributing factor. But then, as I dug deeper and all that, I just go like, yeah, that's right, huh? Fourth factor, surface and appendages. Okay, so we're talking about the fins, ribs, skirts, and tails. Um, why? Like, they increase drag and turbulence, and the more turbulence, the more vibration, the more flutter, the more vibration. So that's why these fins, ribs, skirts, and tails, they're one of those things that actually help. Now think about trolling lures, right? So the tails actually increase drag and turbulence, and they keep everything steady as well. Now, another thing you need to look at, and you have to imagine how things go in the water with this one. It's actually the surface. It could be smooth or textured. So a smooth surface would actually give you a lot more smoother action, whereas with a textured surface, it actually gives you kind of like a turbulent surface, and that has a slight effect on how a lure moves, because an even surface actually makes a lure more erratic, right? So especially at slower speeds, you'll find that textured surfaces would actually have more wobble. Okay, now soft plastic tails, um, appendages. Soft plastic tails, they dampen the action, and I've seen this when they were introducing like these glide baits from before. When you put the tail, the action becomes muted, and it was a way for them to actually make something that's like literally made out of plastic kind of move natural, because the tail, instead of whipping, the soft plastic tail that they put on at the very end make the tail move quite real, because it doesn't slap anymore. There was something there that actually stops the it kind of acted like a cushion. So seeing that was actually pretty cool, and I remember that, and yeah, I mean, it's one of those that actually contribute to the motion of a lure. All right, this I knew for a really long time, but a contributing factor to a lure's movement, hooks and hardware, right? So hook size and weight, and split rings and swivels. Now the hook size and weight, it shifts the balance point, and it changes stability. So you can play around with the size of the hooks and the weight of the hooks, and you can influence just because of the weights and the hook sizes. Because remember, like take for example, a thicker wired hook would actually create more drag, and it has more weight. So it changes the stability and it changes the balance point of a lure. So it really affects the motion of the lure. Now, conversely, split rings, swivels also contribute weight, but more than that, they add flex points that alter the roll or freedom of motion of a lure. This is why some lures actually work better with certain sizes of split rings, smaller sizes. Uh, it could be that the weight of the split ring is something that you should also consider. And the biggest thing that's been happening lately is if you put a different sized single hooks on the lure, they actually make them swim better. Now, conversely, when you're putting on like very heavy lures and all this, it just kills the action. So yeah, definitely hooks and hardware affect lure motion. The sixth factor that makes lures move actually kind of counterintuitive: drag. Okay, drag sets the resistance and it helps the lure move. Like literally, it's a force that moves the lure. Now, whether you're casting or you're trolling, high drag resistance in the water increases the side to side wobble of the lure. The greater the drag, the more it will wobble. In fact, you'll feel it change frequency when you actually reel faster, or when you tow the lure faster. You'll find that when you drop it down, you're going like 3 knots. The lure will kind of sway side to side, and then as you progressively go faster, the lure swims faster, and the vibration it puts out, the wobble it puts out, becomes narrower, tighter. So drag definitely does that to a lure. Now, instead of probably thinking that drag is what stops it from moving, drag is literally what moves it. And it interacts on the sides and the surface area of the lure to actually kind of make it wobble. That's literally it. Now, a surprising thing is lift, but if you're looking at lift and thinking that it's like an airplane, it's sort of the same thing, only in reverse. Angled lips or body shapes actually create lift. Diving, darting, or planing are examples of lift in lures. So the lips and how it dives down, especially with crankbaits or big lip lures like these, literally, that's lift in motion. Um, Something that was kind of complicated, and very little understanding on this for a lot of people, is the Reynolds number, and it has a lot to do with the flow regime, or in simple terms, it would be laminar flow, or I think what is something that a lot of people are familiar with would be turbulence. So laminar flow is the opposite of turbulence. So laminar flow is when everything is smooth. Okay, so in the case of lures, okay, a very good example would be soft plastic lures. Okay, so when you're fishing soft plastic lures, especially the small ones, spike tails and all of that, it has laminar flow. It going through laminar flow because it doesn't do much. So it puts out very little vibration, and there's only two things that would actually get the fish to bite it. So it would be a visual trigger or a chemical trigger, which would be scent. Okay, so that's the reason why, like, take for example, small plastic worms that don't really have a lot of action or vibration get bit, because it's either visual or chemical or both. Okay, now between laminar flow and turbulence, there's a place which is the transition zone. So these are where these things come into play: jigs, spoons, and all of that. These are all in the transition zone between laminar and turbulence, laminar flow and turbulence. And what happens is that when these move, it creates little eddies, creates very little vibration, uh, but it has vibration. And the opposite end of things, there would be lures such as stick baits that actually, um, are in at one point, will be in kind of like an equilibrium between laminar flow, and then it transitions into that the transition zone when you're actually working it, and then once it starts making the bubbles, it becomes turbulent. Okay, now a very good example of lure with a great turbulence would be poppers. So as you can see, that actually contributes to the motion of the lures. Reynolds number is actually a what do you call this? Something that you are very like. I would think like veins, right? So, uh, if you don't have anything on your veins, like let's say plaque that disrupts the flow, then you'll have laminar flow, and that the flow is equal. Or like a hose, you have a hose, and then you pinch the hose, and the water stream becomes turbulent. If you just let it go and let it flow, it's smooth. That's laminar flow. So the lures kind of work in reverse because they're in the water, and the laminar flow is within the body itself. Okay, the sides of the body. Very good examples of lures with lower Reynolds number would be lures like these that actually move a lot and create eddies. And as I mentioned earlier, like these stick baits, when you move them, they actually create eddies, and then what do you call this? These streams of bubbles and stuff like that. So that's turbulence. All right. So hydrodynamic forces, very interesting part of this whole thing. Number 7, we finally made it, boys. This is the part where we come in, retrieval and angler input. So there's 3 elements in this factor right here: retrieve speed, rod tip action, and line angle and tension. And this is something that I think we kind of have an idea when it comes to like retrieve speed. We're always talking about XG, HG, MG, PG. This is where it comes, right? So faster retrieval rates equals stronger hydrodynamic forces in action, as we have discussed earlier with the drag, the planing, and Reynolds number. And some lures only activate at certain speeds, and this is again the reason why we have XG, HG, MG, PG. These are all very important factors. This is to optimize and activate certain lures. We've just found that there are some lures that just work better when they're retrieved faster, or retrieved slower, or somewhere in the middle. Rod tip action. Jerks, twitches, pauses, adds non-harmonic forcing, producing erratic darting or flutter, or a sudden change of pace. These all actually kind of also dictate fish response. So again, this is something that could let's say for poppers, right? Jerks, twitches, and all that, they give different frequencies of sound, and the splashing that you can do as a like a variance, just to break like the cadence, and that's also something that triggers strikes. So again, rod tip action that contributes to the motion of the lure. Line angle and tension, these affect diving depth, action stability, and believe it or not, resonance. And very, very important because, well, especially with resonance, it's a kind of like the sound and the frequency that you're presenting to the fish. So this is very important. Line angle and tension rule over this. Okay. There's a difference between you reeling your line with the rod tip up at 12 o'clock, and there's a difference if you actually put your rod tip down. Now, here's where the resonance thing comes in. You cast your lure out. Let's say it's even a jig or whatever. You cast it out, you pop your rod tip up, you reel very fast. What do you think happens to that lure? It actually goes up to the surface and starts skipping, even if it was something on the heavy side. So that kind of depends on your angle and the speed of your retrieve. But what would happen is that it would present a resonance similar to a fleeing bait fish that's being chased by a predator. The last and certainly not least factor in this whole lure um, movement thing is the environment. Okay, and we're talking about the water density, the viscosity, currents, and turbulence in the water. And these are all affecting how a lure moves. Now, a lot of people don't know that salt water is actually more dense than fresh water. There's dissolved salts in salt water, and in salt water, you'll have lower sink rates. So even if your lure is made out of lead, it actually sinks slower in salt water than it would in fresh water. Um, in salt water, you get more lift. So also because of the minerals that's suspended in the water. So when you're trolling, your lures will tend to get deeper in salt water than they will in fresh water. Now, a very interesting thing to note is that colder water is also much more dense. Okay, so when you're fishing in colder water, you'll find that your lure would sink slower, and more so when you're fishing in cold salt water. So you'll find that your lures are much more lethargic. It dampens the action. But why is this so? And this is something that actually came out while I was speaking with my wife about this, and she was like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah." And then she goes, "How's that?" Well, I go like, "Well, it's closer to being frozen, if you think about that, right?" So if you're closer to being frozen, if the water is closer to being frozen, it means that it's thicker. Now, this is something that you should also think about because, especially for us when we're jigging out in the deep, you're dropping down to levels where the water's really, really cold. Down there, the temperature's gonna be like really, really cold. Like when you're dropping down 150 meters, 200 or something like that. So something to think about when you're choosing rods. This is the reason why my rods are actually kind of stiff for their action, and also why I prefer rods that are heavier than the jigs that I'm using, because when you're dropping down to that kind of depth, you actually need a stiffer rod to lift the jig to be able to give it the best action that you could, because the water is more viscous. Okay, so that's a very big takeaway. Now, also remember that when you're dealing with currents and turbulence, external forces interact with the lure surfaces, and sometimes it enhances flutters and all of this. But especially when you're jigging, probably not a good idea, because as soon as you lift your jig, it kind of carries it somewhere else, right? So again, some of these things you want to take advantage of, especially when you're fishing on the surface, and then you're fishing with poppers and stick baits. For GT in shallower water, that's great and everything, but you need to know how to deal with these things when you're fishing in the deep, when you want to be perfectly vertical with your jig. So again, hope these things actually will make you recognize a few things that would change the way you're fishing, or even when you're buying your lures. And yeah, so what's really cool is that you know, you'll find that the lure's action is governed by quite a few things like mass distribution, buoyancy, the hydrodynamic forces. All of this is driven, of course, by the angler's input. and shaped by the design features like the lips, the body, the overall shape, the appendages, and all that, the distribution. It's really cool. It's science, guys. It's science, and that's what makes it super cool. And I hope you found this video super cool as well. Now, wow, that was not easy. I can tell you that, and I'm quite happy that we're at the tail end of this. Um, if you haven't subscribed and you want to learn more, click on that subscribe button. Give this a like, share. Guys, I worked hard for this, so I really appreciate the like, and even the thumbs down. I've learned to appreciate that because that's an interaction. Comment below if you learned something. Which part you found really interesting in this whole thing. For me, it's actually the Reynolds number. I think that's like something that I resonated with a lot, um, because that's the number that you either lower or make higher for a specific action of a lure that you want. And you can express it in a freaking equation. That's super cool. Like all of this is a play of literally, um it's literally a play between um inertia, buoyancy, and like other forces like lift, drag, and turbulence. This is why it really blows my mind, that we have something like this in our lifetime and we understand it. So it's pretty cool. Alrighty. So I really hope you like this video, and more on this soon. Alrighty. I'd like to take the chance to thank the members. Thank you very much for your support. And if you want to support the channel and help us move forward, go ahead and click that membership button. Alrighty, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Class dismissed.